Have you ever seen a 14-year-old Venus flytrap or Sarracenia rhizome? In this video, I plan to take apart these rock gardens that we planted in 2008. So, at the time of this recording, these plants will be entering their 14th season. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Jacob Farron with Saracenia Northwest. These rock gardens were sitting in our bathtub pond for the past several years. Now, if you haven't watched our video about that bathtub pond, make sure to watch it. I take you through the process of converting a bathtub into a carnivorous plant pond. Now, in this case, we planted these rock gardens that we made in 2008. We have Dana's Delight here, Judith Hindle. This is a red dragon flytrap and Bengal tiger. Now, I know they don't look like much right now. We're in early season, early spring, and I didn't clean them up just yet because I knew I was going to be taking them apart and I wanted to film the process for you. So this is actually a very good time to take apart the rocks, clean them up, and see what's going on underneath all this moss. Now, over the years, these rock gardens took on a life of their own. As the sphagnum moss grew over the rock, we began to see volunteer sundews like Drosera rotundifolia, intermedia, and filiformis. We also saw Darlingtonia pop up and Sarracenia seedlings. Now, various ferns also took up residence in these rocks. Anyway, I need to move the bathtub because we're building a pavilion in that location later this spring. So that means I needed to take apart the rock gardens in order to move the bathtub. This is actually a good time of the year to do this because we're just at the start of the growing season when we're starting to see new growth. I also wanted to take apart these rocks because, well, they weren't growing that well last year. I know they don't look much right now. Again, they're just emerging from winter dormancy, and all the leaves that you see now are from last season. I need to clip them off so that sunlight can get to the new growth. But anyway, I strongly suspect that the plants weren't growing that well last year is because the sphagnum moss is smothering the crown of the rhizome, and the crown is the growing point where pitchers emerge from the rhizome. And right down here you can see the crown of one of these rhizomes. It has a flower stalk right there too. Anyway, what I'm going to do is cut away the moss on these rocks to see what's going on underneath and to see what we can salvage. I'm going to start off with this red dragon fly trap. I'll turn this around here so you can see the other side as I pull this back. And what I'm going to do now is just see how the moss is growing, and I know where to make my cuts with the scissors. Anyway, cut through this mat of sphagnum moss. There we go. There. And I can salvage this Darlingtonia too. And I will be saving all of the sphagnum moss because there are some really lots of gems in this moss here. So I'll set this aside. And let's see what else we can get. Oh yeah, here's a Drosera filiformis right there, and a Sarracenia seedling, and another Darlingtonia. Again, all of those were from seed that just floated through the wind and ended up on the moss. And let's see, what do we got here? We got, oh yeah, here's a fern. This is a fern right there. Kind of looks like my tattoo as well. All right, so I can remove this from the rock, and it comes out pretty easily. And there we go. That's the actual hole of the rock, the original hole, and this is the plant. This flytrap has been living in this rock for 14 years. And oh, it's going to take some work to tease out the flytrap from this moss, because there are lots of roots. Again, Sunday roots and fern roots that are intertwined and everything. It's going to take me a while. So I'll leave this one alone. We'll call it good for now. And we'll move on to another plant. This Judith Hindle right here. To tackle this, what I'm going to do first is remove all of the older pictures. And you've probably seen me do that in other videos. If you haven't seen the video on me trimming Sarracenia, make sure to watch it. All right, that's good enough. Let's see what we can remove here. And just to give you an idea, this is what we're working with. Here's the rock. And this is the sphagnum moss layer. That's how much moss has grown over the years. Oh man, that is very, very thick. What I'm doing is a lot of the roots of the Sunday roots have grown into the rock, so I need to separate them. Yeah, it's pulling apart the roots. That's fine. Again, the main purpose is to salvage the Sarracenia. Oh man, that is thick. And now it's a matter of getting the rest of this moss off. Now here you can see the Sarracenia roots. These are Sarracenia roots. They're usually white and supple like that. Oh, and there's a whole mass of Sarracenia roots here as well. So that's why I'm having a hard time pulling off this moss. And I don't want to cut over here. Now here are also some Sarracenia roots, so I have to be careful about cutting here. What I'm doing now is, rather than using my scissors, I'm just pulling off the moss so I can see where the Sarracenia roots are. There. Now we're getting closer to the plant, and I see this is a fern rhizome. Maybe all the black roots are fern roots, which is probably why if you see ferns pop up in your pots, especially Nepenthes, they pop up in our Nepenthes pots in the greenhouse, and we always remove them when we see them. Although they look nice with the Nepenthes, it's just that the roots intertwine with the Nepenthes roots, and they look the same. Kind of, Nepenthes roots are thin and black, just like these roots are. And once they get intertwined, you can't remove either plant. They have to stay together, or you risk killing off the Nepenthes. Anyway, from here, you can see that we're not in the rock at all. This plant, this Judith Hindle, grew over the rock into the sphagnum moss. Yeah, and because the hole is probably in the center right here, and we're nowhere near the hole of the rock. So you can see all these crowns growing. Ah, there we go. Ha, did it. Whoa, that's a funky looking rock. Look at that. I forgot about that. It had several holes in it, which meant there were several plants, maybe several Judith Hindles in there, and maybe some fly traps too. I'm not even sure what plants were in here originally. I just know that the Judith Hindle was the main one. Anyway, that's pretty wild. Okay, and we got this. Here's underneath. Wow, look. Oh, wow, okay. Part of the rock, too, broke off. I don't know if you can see that. The top of this rock, right there. This section here, right there. It's now lodged in with all these roots, and again, all the roots here, part of that rock. All of those roots grew into the rock. Yeah. Oh, wow. Look at that. A plant tag. Oh, there was a filiformis in here. That's what the tag says. Drosera filiformis. Not sure where it is. I'll find it. But I'm sure it reseeded itself. Anyway, you know what? This is going to be a lot of work. I'm going to do this later. And right now I'm going to get to the other plants, the other rocks. They look a lot easier. Okay, the next one up is this Bengal tiger, which is a Sarracenia flava cross purpurea hybrid. Now, when I took out this rock, the rock just fell right out. So you can tell it wasn't even, the plant was not even in the rock anymore. It started to grow upwards because of the moss growing upwards. And so you can see the hole of the rock right there. That's what the plant was originally in. We'll set that aside and we'll get to this plant and see if we can expose the rhizome. But again, I don't know if I can actually remove all of this moss because there are so many other roots here. Like here's a right there. That's a fern rhizome right there. Lots of non-carnivorous plants. Yeah, that's okay. I'm done with that one. Wow, I'm gonna have to do that one later too. This is Dana's Delight. We'll move on to this one, but I don't think it's going to be any different than what we just saw. Yeah, okay, there's some Darlingtonia right there. Let's salvage those. And you can see the Sarracenia roots, and obviously the plant is not in the rock anymore. It is over the rock, and I think one of the reasons why this particular plant wasn't growing well was because the sphagnum moss just smothered the crown. This is a Dana's Delight right here, and you can see, look at that. Oh my goodness, the crown had elongated. It's starting from down here and it grew upwards. That is not how Sarracenia rhizomes should grow. Again, a rhizome is a type of stem that grows along the soil line, and it should creep along the soil line, and every so often you will find a crown, a growing point where leaves come up. But if the crown is smothered, like with sphagnum moss, and the moss is growing, the crown has to grow upwards in order to send up the leaves. But if the moss will often outpace the growth of the Sarracenia rhizome, so you get these very weak pictures. You can see here that how white this part of this picture is. And when that happens, the picture doesn't develop into a nice, big, open picture. It becomes thin, and very scrawny looking instead. So, okay, here's the rock. Yep, there's the hole, the original hole, and obviously this plant wouldn't have fit into that hole. It outgrew it. That's what happens. But, whoa. Okay. Yeah. Here's a good example of what's going on. This is an elongated crown. See, here's the rhizome, the stem. It was growing this way, and then it produced a crown. But then the crown was getting smothered by sphagnum moss, and it tried to grow upwards. This is not a typical presentation of a Sarracenia rhizome. This is not at all. So this needs to be salvaged, and it can be salvaged. The way we plant this, we would have to plant it up to here with the soil line and just expose this portion of the crown over the soil. And after that, it might take several years, but it should grow normally after that. Well, taking apart those rock gardens was a lot harder than I anticipated. I didn't expect the fern roots to be so tough. I've dealt with ferns when they were popped up in the nepenthes, but usually they were small and easy to pull out. This was 14 years worth of fern roots. It was enmeshed in the sphagnum moss, forming a really tight net. It was very tedious to remove the sphagnum moss because I had to go through with scissors, cutting through the fern roots without cutting the Sarracenia rhizome. But I got everything cleaned up, so let's take a look. This is a 14-year-old Judith Hindle rhizome. It's completely intact, not in pieces like the Dana's Delight or Bengal Tiger. It has very nice roots and nicely shaped crowns. It's even producing flower stalks right there. Now, this is how a Judith Hindle should look like. This is a typical presentation, and you can see how the rhizome stem terminates into a crown, and that crown should be stout and compact. That's how they should look like. Overall, this is a very healthy plant with lots of growth points, and you can see here the fine black roots. Those are fern roots. They're completely enmeshed throughout the rhizome, and I could spend time picking them out, but you know what? It's not worth it. The plant has already lived with those fern roots for the past 14 years, so I think it will be fine. Now let's take a look at other plants we have here. These are examples of what can happen when sphagnum moss smothers a Sarracenia. The crowns become elongated just like this. The plants are healthy, but they just have these misshapen crowns. Again, it's because the growth of the sphagnum moss outpaced the growth of these plants. Now, Judith Hindle doesn't look like this because it was able to keep up with the pace of the sphagnum moss. And Judith Hindle grows well in our climate in the Pacific Northwest. It likes cool summers, or it can grow well in cool summers. Bengal Tiger and Dana's Delight, they grow best where summers are hot, like in Florida, down there and throughout the East Coast. Bengal Tiger and Dana's Delight grow very quickly. Here in the Pacific Northwest, they grow very slowly. Now, I did find a rhizome that has a normal presentation. This is Dana's Delight. This is a normal presentation of that hybrid. And you can see the stem here and how compact the crown is. Again, this is a normal presentation, and it was probably growing on the edge of the sphagnum mound. Now let's get to the red dragon fly traps. these are what they look like after 14 years, and I'll say this isn't what we expected. We should have expected to see at least a few large corms, and the bulbous base of a Venus flytrap is called a corm, not a bulb, but a corm. In a normal planting with peat moss and perlite, a flytrap would develop a very large corm over several years. But we're not seeing that here. We're seeing a bunch of little ones, and that's because the sphagnum moss smothered the older plant. Now here's the rock that the original flytrap was in. After a few years, the corm probably got very big and produced offshoots. However, as the moss layer got thicker, that original flytrap probably got smothered by the moss. But the colony of flytraps was able to keep up pace with the moss by producing more offshoots. The only drawback was that there wasn't sufficient time for any single flytrap to develop a large corm. Now, it is possible to grow Venus flytraps in sphagnum moss. You just have to use a particular species of sphagnum that forms a tight mound. The species we have here on the West Coast forms large, fluffy mounds, which grows quicker. There's another species of sphagnum moss found on the East Coast that forms tighter, compact mounds and grows a bit slower. So that's probably the appropriate type of sphagnum moss for Venus flytraps, and maybe for the slower growing Sarracenia as well. By the way, I did find a photograph of the red dragon flytrap in this very rock from 2004. So at the time of this filming, the plant was in this rock for 18 years. So you got to see what happens to Sarracenia and flytraps when left unchecked. And that begs the question, how often should you repot your rock garden? Well, every 14 years apparently. Actually, that really depends on your comfort level. If you're the type that likes your plant to fit neatly in the hole that you drilled out, then you'll probably need to replace the plant with a smaller one every 1 to 2 years. And that will depend on the growth of the plant and the size of the hole that you drilled out. If you're using sphagnum moss as a top dressing, well, you probably could let your rock garden go indefinitely. We've seen it work here. The plant will simply grow into the sphagnum moss and over the rock. None of the plants here fit neatly into any of the holes that were originally drilled out. Now, we have other rock gardens that are just as old and even older than these. We have one that is 20 years old, and I'll do a video on that later this summer. If you want to learn how to build these rock gardens, visit our YouTube channel. We have several videos on the topic. And if you want to learn how to grow carnivorous plants in general, visit our website at growcarnivorousplants.com. Thank you for watching, and good growing.